All right, this is ale versus ale v yeast. Take one. Ale versus yeast. Action.
Let's get it on.
Let's get it going. It's time. All right, you want to start? Or you want me to start? Ale versus yeast.
Oh, what a journalist.
All right, I'll start. Ale versus yeast.
I'll start.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, so a lot of people come up to us after our brew school class, and one of the most common questions that they get is they say, well, we want to start off with something really simple. We want to make something like a Budweiser clone. And what we have to tell people is that that's actually a really difficult beer to make. And we talk about the difference between lagers and ales. So we're going to talk about exactly what that means. What is the difference between a lager and an ale? Because actually a lot of people don't really understand what the difference is.
They don't, and it's kind of ironic, I think, because people will, a beer is as bland as Budweiser, your mass-produced stuff. Sorry, InBev, but it's just not that good. When you have a bland beer, it's actually difficult to make a beer that's that uniform, that's that devoid of flavor. Sorry, it just is. There's just not much to it. It's hard to make a beer like that, which is the most deliciously ironic thing I think about the beer making process, is that the ales are so much more easier to make. The big thing, the difference between the ales and the lager is the type of yeast you use. Now, it looks the same, it comes often in the same packet, but the yeast is the big thing that separates the yeast. The yeast is the big thing that separates the lagers from the ales. Ale yeast can ferment at room temperature, but lagers have to ferment at a much cooler temperature, usually around the 50-degree mark. Talk about when you made your lager.
Right, so I've made a couple different lagers. I made a really light beer for a brewing friend of ours who likes Keystone Light. We don't really talk about that very much, but it is true. We do have a friend who likes Keystone Light, so we tried to make a home brew that would match his flavor palette. And when we did that, it was the first time that I'd ever lagered a beer. And the way that I did it was I have a chest freezer, which I use for kegging and I use for fermenting my beer because I can control the temperature in it. Basically, you have to ferment your beer for a lager around 50 degrees. It takes much longer to lager. And after the beer is fermented, you have to move it over to a secondary vessel, usually which is a glass carboy. And it has to sit at around 38, 40 degrees for anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, even longer potentially. And that does things like cleaning up all of the byproducts of the fermentation. Lagering is a really interesting process, whereas ales contribute a lot of things like esters and phenols, which are just different byproducts of fermentation that add different aspects of fruitiness, different flavors to the beer. Lagers ferment really, really cleanly. And during that process of lagering at the end, which is keeping it at a very cold temperature, like I said, all of those things really get cleaned up from the beer. So you get a very crisp, clean flavor profile.
You do, and one of the reasons most homebrewers make ales is because to make a lager, not only do you have to use the temperature change, the 50, and then you're conditioning it, just above the freezing mark for a month, but you're talking about 2 months basically to make a lager, where you can make an ale in about 2 weeks.
That's why we love ales.
That's why we love ales. You get to drink them quicker. They're ready quicker, you can enjoy them quicker, and it doesn't take as much refrigeration at precise temperatures to get it done on time. And the ales offer a lot more complexity that you're not going to find with the crisp, clean finish of a lager.
So a lot of people are familiar with some of the different ale fermentation flavors, like when you have something like a Belgian and you have those banana and clove flavors. Different flavors like that are things that are contributed by ale yeasts. Lagers, on the other hand, they are very, like I said, very crisp and clean. They usually go into the very thin beers. And so if people like porters, stouts, things like that, ale yeast is much easier to ferment.
Most of the beers that are considered craft beer, well, not a lot of them are considered part of the ale family. You got your two basic families when you're talking about beer. You got your ale families and your lager families. So the ales include everything, like as Scott was saying, the brown ales, porters, stouts, IPAs, pale ales. All those are in the ale family, while a lot of your light beers and the stuff that you won't find much of a hop profile with, for the most part, are found in your lager families. And that's all I've got to say about that. Yeah. Are we missing anything? Is that good?